Today's video is brought to you by friend of the channel, Audible. Audible is one of my favorite sponsors to work with because I use Audible pretty much every single day. I've got over 100 titles owned on Audible. I've spent almost a month and a half listening to audiobooks and to other audio productions. And the thing is, there are people who are a lot higher than me. If that's you, let me know how many Audible hours you have down in the comments. Audible is great. On a basic level, you sign up for an Audible membership, you get a credit a month, and you can use that in exchange for a free audiobook, which you keep no matter whether you continue your Audible subscription or not. Audible's more than that though. It's the leading provider of spoken word entertainment all in one place, so you get not only audiobooks, but also a variety of original entertainment, including thousands of popular podcasts. You'll also get access to the Audible Plus category, which has thousands of audiobooks, original entertainment, guided fitness and meditation programs, and more, all which you can get for free, no credits needed. By the way, if you're looking for a recommendation, I recently re-listened to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, the novelization. It's absolutely phenomenal. It expands on the premise of the movie, fills in so many awesome details, and comes with full sound and music. Right now, you can get a free Audible trial by going to audible.com/Eckhart'sLadder or by texting Eckhart's Ladder to 500-500. Links, as always, down in the description. Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Ladder. Hello and welcome to another video, and I think today's content is really interesting because we're talking about a super star destroyer which, within the lore, just should not exist, and specifically about Warlord Zsinj, one of the most famous Imperials of all time, perhaps having access to one of the greatest super star destroyer classes to ever exist, the Sovereign type. A super star destroyer which was not even completed before his death. How did this happen? How did Zsinj get access to a ship that wasn't even fully complete before he died? A ship which may have never been fully completed. Well, that's what we'll talk about today. Before we get into the mystery though, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context about the characters and the things that we're discussing, just so it makes sense and so you can understand why it doesn't make sense as well. First off, of course, we have Warlord Zsinj. Warlord Zsinj was the most powerful Imperial, arguably, in the years after the Battle of Endor. He was a serious threat to both the Empire and the New Republic. He operated in a large swath of space. He wasn't a hardline Imperial, he was more self-serving, and as I mentioned before his death, he was a serious threat. Zsinj was killed in the courtship of Princess Leia at the Battle of Dathomir in 8 ABY, which is relatively early on in the post-Endor period, only 4 years after Return of the Jedi. The Sovereign, on the other hand, was a planned class of super star destroyer under Palpatine's Dark Empire. The Sovereign was a slightly smaller version of the Eclipse, which was Palpatine's flagship when he was reborn. It was 15 kilometers long, included a miniaturized super laser, and would have easily been one of the most powerful warships in the entire galaxy. We don't really learn much about the Sovereign for reasons that will be evident in just a moment, but we do get some details in the Dark Empire source book, which I'll read for you now. The Sovereign was a less powerful design of the Eclipse class. The Emperor envisioned a fleet of these vessels. The first of the line, still under construction, is the Sovereign. Other potential ships in the line include the Otarch, Despot, and Heresiarch. So yeah, the reason we don't hear about the Sovereign is because, as per that blurb, even by Operation Shadow Hand and the final death of Palpatine, no Sovereign, including the lead ship of the class, had finished construction. What's more, it seems like the Sovereign's 3 sister ships were still in planning stages. As far as we know, no Sovereign, including the Sovereign herself, was ever completed. That's why it's a little bit strange that if you, say, look up the Sovereign, the ship itself, on the Star Wars wiki, you'll see that it was used at some point by Warlord Zsinj, and that doesn't really make sense. Zsinj died in 8 ABY, as I mentioned. Operation Shadow Hand occurred in 10 ABY, and at that point the Sovereign was still under construction, so what's going on here, and what's the source of confusion? I find this to be an interesting discussion point because I like to see how the lore evolves, and in cases like this where it appears that wires have been crossed, it's interesting to try to figure out, well, what happened. So where's the source of Zsinj having the Sovereign? Well, it's actually the Star Wars Encyclopedia, and for those who don't know, there is a 3-volume Star Wars Encyclopedia which covers pretty much everything, no matter how minor, in the Star Wars legends. Anyway, if you go to the entry for Sovereign, you'll see that the Sovereign was listed as a super star destroyer used by Warlord Zsinj, with its sister ships being the same same three we mentioned earlier, the Autarch, Heresiarch, and Despot. The weird thing is, Warlord Zsinj did have a Super Star Destroyer. He was very, very well known for his Iron Fist, which was his flagship and which was one of the most visible symbols of power in the post-Endor period. Interestingly enough, the Iron Fist does actually receive an entry in the encyclopedia. It's correctly identified as Zsinj's Super Star Destroyer. It was originally named the Brawl, etc., etc. So what's going on here? Did Zsinj have a second Super Star Destroyer? I mean, this wouldn't even be the first time. Zsinj also tried to acquire and use the Razor's Kiss, which was another Super Star Destroyer. Is it possible the shipyards of Biss were raided and the Sovereign was stolen? I don't really think so. Now, we do actually see something sort of similar happen with the Eclipse being stolen by the Zon Consortium, but there's some major differences, including the fact that even by Operation Shadowhand, the Sovereign was not in a workable state, and the fact that the Eclipse at the time was being built at Kuat, which is much more visible and accessible than Biss, which was essentially secret and very highly fortified, especially in this era. I mean, Zsinj stealing the ship would help explain why it wasn't ready before the Eclipse, despite being smaller and probably easier to construct, but I think much more likely there was a miscommunication somewhere along the line that led to this, and I actually may have discovered the reason why when listening to a Star Wars audiobook. So, the end of Courtship of Princess Leia sees Han Solo take down the Iron Fist in a very cool moment. It's pretty iconic, and of course, it ends the threat of Warlord Zsinj, although that's an interesting discussion too, because that's actually Zinj's first appearance, then his backstory was sort of added later for Wraith Squadron, but whatever. However, if you listen to the audiobook, Warlord Zsinj is not in the Iron Fist. He's in a different Super Star Destroyer called the Sovereign. Now, the Sovereign in that book is not a Sovereign class. It's just another Executor or some other ship. It doesn't have a super laser or anything like that. It's not described as being an unknown vessel. Sovereign is just its name, and I'm going to play a brief clip from the audiobook for you guys to listen to so you know that I'm just not making things up.
This is General Han Solo. Han nudged the stick, and the Falcon rose toward the forward command module of the Sovereign. Look up at your view screen, you vermin. Kiss my Wookiee.
So that's interesting, and I'm wondering what happened. Is it possible the audiobook was based off an earlier edition of The Courtship of Princess Leia? I actually don't have a first edition of the book, so I'm not sure if maybe in that first edition the super ship was called the Sovereign, or if the audiobook was based off a version of the script before that edit was put in. Maybe the ship was just changed names for whatever reason, but this is almost certainly the source of the confusion within the Star Wars encyclopedia, because we also know from the Courtship of Princess Leia specifically that Zsinj did not have the manpower or the resources to actually crew 2 Super Star Destroyers. That's a bit of lore we get within the book itself. I don't know how they put together the encyclopedia. It's just an incredible achievement because of detail, but I assume that somewhere, whether they were just going through old text files or something, they based the Sovereign entry off an old script for the Courtship of Princess Leia, and then the Iron Fist off something more recent. So there was a bit of crossover there, especially where the Iron Fist also appeared in other works like The Essential Guide to Warfare and whatever not, whereas the Sovereign also has information from the Dark Empire sourcebook. They're both sort of combined to make a ship which exists but also at the same time doesn't. So did Zsinj have an experimental Super Star Destroyer that never actually saw active service? No, it was a simple editing mistake, but an interesting one at that, and I'd really love to know how was the encyclopedia put together, because there's just so much detail, there are so many entries, it's really incredible. But guys, that's all for now. Until next time, have a good one, be safe, and may the Force be with you.